So I don't know about you, but I'm actually not a big fan of ties in the National Football League. If one team scores 40 points and another team scores 40 points, it seems to me that we shouldn't be ending with an actual tie. You know, one thing can be said about this Dallas Cowboy football team. At the very least, this team is highly entertaining. Sure, they don't play a lot of defense, but I think they actually play more defense than the actual Baltimore Ravens are so far this year. Another thing about Sunday night's broadcast, it was clear to me that the good folks over at NBC might have thought that Jerry Jones was actually Taylor Swift at her very first Kansas City Chiefs game watching Travis Kelce play. It was Jerry's name comes up, Panda Jerry. Micah Parsons' name comes up, Panda Jerry. Jerry got panned too so many times that I thought for sure I was actually watching a Kansas City Chiefs game with Taylor Swift in the box. And I will say this once again, at the very least, you could say what you want about this Dallas Cowboy football team on the defensive side of the ball. You can say what you want about this Dallas Cowboy offensive team. At the end of the day, the beautiful thing about this year's version of the Dallas Cowboys is, at the very least, they are all, including the ownership group, very entertaining. Okay, welcome back to the sleigh, as always, North America. I'm Dave DeBaugh, coming to you from the Silicon Valley. Now, this is our big Week 4 reaction to what went down in the National Football League. The NFL is actually giving us 2 Monday night games tonight, so we won't be covering any of those. We will get into my Week 4 reaction in just a little bit, but we begin with our feature story of the day, and that, of course, has to be what went down on Sunday night. It was the big Micah Parsons returns to the Dallas Cowboys Stadium for the first time since the big trade. It was Panda Jerry, pan left to Jerry, pan right to Jerry. It was get Jerry Jones on your television screen as much as humanly possible. And that's a big part of what went down during NBC's broadcast. That being said, I think the fact that the game actually ended in a tie, and it wasn't a 0-0 tie, it wasn't a 10-10 tie where the offenses were absolutely horrible. It was a game that actually ended in a 40-40 tie. I hate the fact that this particular game actually ended up that way, and that their players of the game at the very end were Jordan Love and Dak Prescott. Now, we know that both of them actually threw for over 300 yards, 31 for 43 for Jordan Love with 3 touchdowns, Dak Prescott 31 for 40, 319 yards and 3 touchdowns in the game. I have to say, as I watched the entire game, I can tell you confidently that I'm not terribly worried about the Green Bay Packer defense at this point. I'm sure they'll right the ship. But one of the things that you have to keep in mind when you're talking about this year's incarnation of the Dallas Cowboys is they do have an extremely good offense. And Dak Prescott, quite frankly, is playing some of the best football I've ever seen him play. His decision-making at this point is off the hook. And of course, we know that he was actually missing CeeDee Lamb last night. Now, I'm not saying George Pickens is actually going to play that way every game, but if he can play pretty much that way until CeeDee Lamb gets back, the Dallas Cowboy offense, at the very least, will be in good shape. You know, it's also safe to say that if you're a national broadcaster and you have the opportunity to put the Dallas Cowboys on television at some point in a primetime game, at the very least, you won't be embarrassed about their defense necessarily. You won't be embarrassed about the Dallas Cowboy offense because it is highly entertaining. And in fact, it is a lot of fun to watch. In fact, I would put it in my top 5 offenses that I want to watch come Sundays. Look, at the end of the day, the Green Bay Packers and the Dallas Cowboys put on an offensive spectacle, and defense certainly wasn't a big part of what went down, was it, on Sunday night? Jordan Love is dealing with a lot of injuries from a wide receiver perspective as well. Certainly, in his defense, you need to mention that. But when we think about the Green Bay Packers, at the beginning of the season, everybody had the Green Bay Packers actually going to the Super Bowl. And the team that you watched on Sunday night, does that look like a team that is actually going to go to the Super Bowl from the NFC? Now, look, it's a long season, and I get that. And I understand that the Dallas Cowboy offense, as I mentioned, is probably going to end up as one of the top 5 or 6 offenses in the National Football League if everybody, including Dak Prescott, can remain healthy. That is how well this particular offense is playing at this point, which, of course, makes the Dallas Cowboy fan base hopeful. And really, what do you need in the National Football League as you enter Week 5? You either need hopefulness that your team still has a shot, or you need at that point to understand that you're a bad football team like the Tennessee Titans and you're not actually going to go anywhere this year. They are on the side of hopeful right now, despite the fact that they're 1-2-1. Still, when I think about this Green Bay Packer team, I'm not terribly worried about the defense at this point. They will right the ship. They will play a bunch of teams that do not have the kind of firepower that the Dallas Cowboys currently have from an offensive perspective. The Packers will be fine. Love to know your thoughts and opinions on what went down in that game. I also had to give it to the Dallas Cowboy front office, the Jones family, and of course, Jerry Jones, because they did go out and get Javonte Williams. I do also want to point out, because a lot of people talk about the Jones family as if they don't know what they're doing. And the reality is they do. They just haven't done enough of it to actually get to a Super Bowl over the last 25 years. They certainly know how to put together a strong enough roster to be competitive enough to be on the verge of making the playoffs almost every year. Ask yourself this question. When was the last time, like 2 seasons in a row, you thought this Dallas Cowboy team wasn't at the very least a threat to make the playoffs? That is a sign, actually, of a very well-run National Football League organization. Sort of the opposite of what's happening with the Carolina Panthers and the Tennessee Titans and what's happened with the Chicago Bears as well. We can go through the list of other National Football League franchises that, quite frankly, don't perform well over a long period of time. I'm talking about decades. And for decades now, the Dallas Cowboy team seems to not always just be in the news, but seems to always be on the threat of, at the very least, making it to the playoffs year in and year out. And I know a lot of people love to come down on the Cowboys, but that is the reality of the actual situation. So I wanted to get into some of the stats and some of the big players of the week in Week 4 and my reaction to what went down. Now, Matthew Stafford certainly continues to do what we've seen Matthew Stafford do throughout his career. I think every time I think Matthew Stafford is really starting to ski down the backside of Career Mountain, he actually surprises me. And this appears to be another year in which I'm surprised. You know, with all the back injuries during training camp and all of the new technology that the Rams actually had to bring in to help Matthew Stafford actually get right, watching him throw 3 touchdown passes yesterday, only take 3 sacks, and actually throw for over 375 yards gives me renewed confidence in what Matthew Stafford's actually going to be able to do for this Los Angeles Rams team this particular year. Now, my overall reaction to what went down on Sunday was pretty simple, which is simple to say that the Tennessee Titans are an absolutely horrific football team. The Eagles just simply know how to win games. The Buffalo Bills certainly took the New Orleans Saints lightly for a half of football and still came out on top. The Carolina Panthers came back down to earth and got shattered by the New England Patriots. The Cleveland Browns clearly do not have a starting quarterback on their roster at this point. Joe Flacco looks like he's seen deer in the headlights at this point and should actually be home with the rest of us watching Geico commercials. And then, of course, there's the Chicago Bears and the Las Vegas Raiders. Bears ended up winning. Caleb looked good again for the second week in a row. But that was a win. Yeah, it was a win on the road. But it was against the Raiders, who, from a roster perspective, do not look that good, especially on the defensive side of the ball, especially from a depth perspective. So that's sort of a quick rundown and reaction to what went down in the National Football League on Sunday. Not going to get into the Falcons' victory or any of that stuff at this point. And last thing I wanted to cover on today's show was simply to say, how surprised were you by the New York Giants and Jackson Dart and his performance as they actually took down the Los Angeles Chargers? Jackson Dart's stats, 13 for 20, 111 yards, 1 touchdown. Justin Herbert was 23 for 41, 203 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. There was a lot of singing the praises of Justin Herbert. And I always have Justin Herbert sitting there on the verge, on the edge of being a top 5 quarterback in the National Football League. And yes, it's true. Quarterbacks are going to have ups and downs throughout a long season. And I totally get it. And I get that the Chargers flew all the way across the country to play the New York Giants. But this was a rookie quarterback starting in the National Football League. Where was Harbaugh's defense? Why did they not get more pressure on Jackson Dart? How the hell did they allow the New York Giants to actually win the game? When I think of the biggest surprises in week 4 and the biggest possible reaction that I could possibly have at this point is that maybe Jackson Dart's just a winner. Maybe Jackson Dart is the real thing. But I struggle to actually say that when the guy barely threw for over 100 yards, if you know what I mean. I think more than anything, what happened on Sunday for the New York Giants is Brian Daboll lived to coach another week. All right. Love to know your thoughts and reactions on all of this. I want to thank everybody so much for tuning into The Slay. This is a brand new podcast. We cover the NFL, NBA, and more. And while I was hoping that the USA men's golf team was actually going to find a way and come back and win the Ryder Cup, at least it didn't end up in a tie. I am just saying. All right, for The Slay, as always, I'm Dave DeBaugh. Wishing you all a bunch of good luck because you're going to need it, and enjoy the rest of your sports viewing day.